We've talked about social welfare functions. Now, where do those things come from? Well, in democracy, people vote to express their preferences. Now, rather than thinking specifically about the situation where the social welfare function expresses society's preferences over how utility is distributed between two consumers, we can just think of it as more generally we have some set of alternatives from which we have to pick a policy, and every person has some preferences over these alternatives. Now, these alternatives could certainly be what the distribution of utilities is, but it could be more general than that. So let's take a look at what kind of social welfare functions we could come up with. So let's look at, in particular, let's start with looking at the social welfare function that results from having individuals vote and using the majority relation. So let's suppose a majority of people prefer policy A to policy B, and we say that then A is socially preferred to B. Now, the question is, would doing this for every pair of policies yield a well-defined social preference? Remember, a preference, which we described very early on in the course, is a is something that is complete and transitive. So what do we mean by complete? So it's complete, meaning every pair of alternatives, take any pair of alternatives A and B, you can come up with whether society thinks A is better or B is better, right? So you can make a comparison. There's never the response is never, well, we don't really know how we compare A and B. So when each individual has a complete preference and can therefore make a comparison between A and B, then indeed, if we use the majority to determine whether A is socially preferred to B, then the majority relation, the majority social welfare function is going to be complete as well. But it also has to be transitive. Right? Remember, transitivity says if A is at least as good as B is at least as good as C, then it better be that A is at least as good as C. Or stated another way, if A beats B beats C, A better beat C as well. Unfortunately, using the majority to determine which alternative is preferred to between any two alternatives does not give us a transitive preference. Now, let me give you an example of that. So let's say we have, for simplicity, let's just look at a very small economy or a small group of people where you have three people. You have individuals 1, 2, and 3, and we have three alternatives, A, B, and C. And these people have preferences where individual 1 thinks A is the best, B is second best, C is the worst. And similarly, 2 and 3 rank B, C, A, C, A, B, respectively. Now, there are, so we're going to have them vote. There are three pairs. We're going to have them vote between A and B, A and C, and B and C. So let's first have them vote between A and B. How many people are going to vote for A? So if I say, okay, A and B, how many people vote for A? Well, individual 1 likes A better than B. If we compare, individual 3 likes A better than B. So 1 and 3 like A better than B. Individual 2 likes B better than B better than A, sorry. So, so now we see that there's more people who like A than B. So A beats B when we go by the majority preference. So A beats B. Now, next what we're going to do is we're going to look at B and C. B and C. So, how many people like B better than C? Well, individual 1 likes B better than C. Individual 2 likes B better than C. Individual 3 likes C better than B. So we have individuals 1 and 2 like B better than C. Individual 3 likes C better than B. Now there's more people who like B better than C, so B beats C. Transitivity, if the social preference was transitive, then since A beats B and B beats C, well, we would want A to beat C. Unfortunately, when we look at the comparison between A and C, who likes A over C? Well, individual 1 likes A better than C, but the other two, they don't. They like C better than A. So there are more people who like C than A, so C beats A. So what we have is a non-transitive preference. So A beats B, B beats C, and C beats A. So we've got the cycle in the social preference. So this preference is not transitive. So when we use majority to determine the social preference, we end up with a non-transitive preference. Now, is there some other system we could have used to end up with a better social preference to avoid this problem? Well, that was the question that Ken Arrow sought to answer, and he came up with what's called Arrow's Impossibility theorem. So we wrote down a list of requirements for whatever the way is that we're going to use to take individual preferences and turn those into a social welfare function. So he said, first of all, we want the social preference to be complete and transitive, right? So it needs to actually be a preference. Second, it has to have some notion that is actually reflecting in individuals' preferences. It can't just be completely separated from what people's preferences are. So if everybody says A is better than B, then you'd think society should say A is also better than B. So this is, we call this efficiency. Again, this is a very minimal requirement. It just says that the preferences actually have to reflect, the social preferences actually have to reflect individual preferences. The third requirement is that society's ranking of A and B should only depend on how everybody feels about A relative to B. So how you rank, if I'm interested in, well, okay, should we do alternative A or should we do alternative B? I should just be able to ask everybody, well, how do you guys feel about A and B? It shouldn't matter where C is in everybody's rankings. Finally, the last requirement is that there's no quote unquote dictator. Right? So what do we mean by dictatorship? Well, I would say that an individual is a dictator if no matter what everybody's preferences are, society's preferences reflect that person's preferences all the time. Okay, so in other words, so the social preference is exactly equal to this one person's preference. Then we would say that that person is a dictator. And that doesn't seem like a very good situation to be in. So we'll call that no dictatorship. So these are the criteria that Arrow said, well, if we have a social welfare function, if we have a way of aggregating individuals' preferences into society's preferences, we would want these 4 criteria to be satisfied. And his theorem is that, unfortunately, there's no way of doing that. So there's no social welfare function that satisfies all 4 of these criteria. Stated differently, if you want a way of aggregating individual preferences into a single social preference that satisfies the property that the social preference is actually a preference, so that's complete and transitive, that it actually reflects individuals' preferences, so that when everybody's in agreement that A is better than B, that society also says A is better than B. And finally, that if you want this way of aggregating preferences to be such that when you're trying to determine whether society prefers A to B, all that matters is how individuals rank A and B. Where they rank some third alternative C doesn't really affect the social ranking of A and B. If you want all 3 of these, The only thing you can do is have a dictator. That's what Arrow's impossibility theorem says.